envelope that shouldn't exist. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the climate control system. Glass cases lined the walls, each holding a piece of history. Rare manuscripts, signed records, photographs faded by decades of time. But in the center of Sotheby's London showroom, under a single beam of warm light, sat a simple cream-colored envelope. It wasn't the rarest artifact in the room. It wasn't studded with diamonds or sealed with gold. And yet, the crowd that had gathered seemed unable to look away, because on that envelope, in neat, bold handwriting, were 3 words: to the world. Beneath it, a date, November 22nd, 1991. One day before Freddie Mercury died. The rumors had started the moment the Sotheby's auction catalog was leaked. Whispers that this letter, this final handwritten message, had never been seen by anyone outside of Freddie's most intimate circle. Not his bandmates, not his fans, not even Mary Austin, the woman he called the love of his life. And yet, here it was 3 decades later, sitting behind glass like a sleeping ghost. The official catalog description was vague: personal letter, provenance withheld. That was it. No details about how it was found, or why it had remained hidden for over 30 years. But people talked, and the more they talked, the more impossible the story became. Some said it was stolen from his Kensington home, Garden Lodge, in the chaos after his death. Others claimed it had been left in a safety deposit box by an unnamed friend. A few insisted it was a fake, designed to pull in millions from collectors desperate to own a final piece of rock and roll history. But deep down, everyone in that room knew it was real. In the back of the showroom, standing half in shadow, was a man named Daniel Ashford, a journalist who had spent the last 10 years of his career chasing stories no one else dared to touch. He'd written about war crimes, political cover-ups, and the unsolved deaths of celebrities. But this was different. Daniel wasn't here just to report. He was here because Freddie Mercury had saved his life once, not with a handshake or an autograph, but with a song. It was the winter of 1992, 3 months after Freddie's death, when Daniel, then a lonely, broken 17-year-old, heard "The Show Must Go On" a battered cassette player in his bedroom. The lyrics, the voice, the defiance in the face of death. It was the first time he'd felt understood. And now, decades later, the man who had unknowingly kept him alive might finally speak to him from beyond the grave. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the room. Lot number 27. Opening bid, £50,000. Gasps rippled through the audience. Hands twitched in the air. Numbers climbed. 50 became 80. 80 became 120. Within minutes, the bid had doubled, then tripled. Daniel's eyes never left the envelope. His editor had told him to get the story, no matter the cost. But this wasn't just about a headline anymore. This was about a truth buried for 30 years, locked away in a few sheets of paper sealed behind a faint red wax stamp. And Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was inside that envelope was never meant to be public. As the gavel slammed down and the winning bidder's name was whispered to the staff, Daniel pulled out his phone. He had less than 48 hours before the letter would vanish into private hands, maybe forever, and he was going to find a way to read it, even if it meant tearing open the last secret of Freddie Mercury. The house that still breathes. The cold London air bit at Daniel's face as he stood across the street from one, Logan Place, better known to the world as Garden Lodge. It didn't look like a monument. It looked like a home. Tall brick walls framed by ivy, a green door that had once been covered in thousands of fan messages and flowers. Now, decades later, it was quiet, clean, almost too clean. Mary Austin still lived here. Freddie had left her the house in his will, along with most of his estate. She was a keeper of his private world, his furniture, his clothes, the piano where he'd written Bohemian Rhapsody, and perhaps the keeper of the truth about the letter. Daniel wasn't sure if she'd even open the door to him. Mary had been fiercely protective of Freddie's memory, avoiding interviews unless they were for causes he would have supported. But Daniel had one advantage. He wasn't here to write a gossip piece. He was here for something deeper. He rang the bell. Minutes passed. Then the door opened just enough for him to see her, still elegant, still composed, her voice soft but wary. "Mr. Ashford," she said, as if she'd already checked who he was. "I don't do interviews anymore." "This isn't an interview," Daniel replied. "It's about the letter." The pause was telling. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't close the door. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Lot 27. Sotheby's. Cream envelope. Your handwriting on the catalog says, 'Provenance withheld.'" "Mary, did Freddie write it?" The door opened a little wider, and for a moment, her face softened. "If he did, it was not for strangers to read." "That's exactly why I'm here," Daniel said. "Because if this is real, and if it's about what I think it's about, then it's not just a letter. It's history, and history belongs to the world." Mary's gaze held it for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she shook her head. "You think you understand him because you heard his music. But Freddie wasn't just songs and costumes. He was contradictions. He was generous and guarded, loud and secretive. He gave pieces of himself to millions, but the deepest parts he only gave to a few. That letter, if it's his, was probably written for one person, and that person might not even be alive anymore." She stepped back, signaling the conversation was over. "Mr. Ashford, sometimes the last thing someone leaves behind isn't meant to be found." The door closed with a quiet click, and Daniel stood there, listening to the silence behind the walls. The house seemed to hum with the ghosts of laughter, piano chords, and footsteps on polished wood. He could almost hear Freddie's voice, warm, teasing, telling him to go on, "Darling, the show must go on." As Daniel turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A blocked number. "Mr. Ashford?" The voice was male, older with a faint accent. "If you want the truth about the letter, meet me tomorrow. Camden Town. Noon. Bring cash." Before Daniel could respond, the line went dead. The man in Camden. Camden Town at noon was its usual chaos. A swirl of tourists snapping photos of the market stalls, street musicians playing for loose change, and the smell of street food drifting through the cold air. Daniel stood near the bronze statue of Amy Winehouse, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. Then he saw him, tall, thin, wrapped in a faded leather jacket, his gray hair tied back in a loose knot. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, as if each step was measured. The man approached Daniel without a smile, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. "You came alone?" he asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, glancing around before speaking. "My name's Victor. I used to work with Freddie, not on stage, behind the scenes. I was one of his sound engineers in Montreux. I was there in 1991. The last sessions." Daniel's pulse quickened. "And the letter?" Victor's lips pressed into a thin line. "I saw him write it. I don't know who it was for, but I know what it meant to him. He kept it in a drawer in his study. I never saw him seal it, but I knew, somehow, that it wasn't just another thank you note or a bit of fan mail. It was personal." They moved to a small cafe on a side street, away from a noise. Victor ordered tea, Daniel black coffee. The older man leaned forward, his voice low. "You want the truth? Fine, but it's not pretty. The Freddie you know from the videos, the showman, the wild one, that wasn't the man I saw in those last weeks. He was tired, not just from the illness, from carrying the weight of all those expectations." Victor's eyes drifted for a moment, lost in memory. Flashback, Montreux, summer 1991. Freddie sat at the grand piano in Mountain Studios, fingers grazing the keys, but not pressing down. A cigarette burned in the ashtray beside him, smoke curling lazily into the air. His frame was thinner than before, his face sharper, but his eyes, those dark, mischievous eyes, still had fire in them. "You know, darling," he said to Victor without looking up, "when you're this close to the end, you start to realize how much rubbish you've been keeping in your life. Letters you never sent, apologies you never made, songs you never finished." Victor adjusted the microphone stand, unsure how to respond. Freddie finally pressed a chord, letting it ring out. "I'm writing something. Not a song, not for the press. Just something I need to say to the world." Or maybe to no one. Haven't decided yet. He chuckled softly, but there was a tremor in it. Funny thing, isn't it? We spend our lives shouting into microphones, but the truest words we ever write, no one hears them. Back in the cafe, Victor took a slow sip of tea. That was the last time he spoke about it to me. A week later, he flew back to London. I heard rumors the letter stayed in Garden Lodge. Then nothing, until I saw that Sotheby's catalog. Daniel's hands tightened around his coffee cup. So you're telling me it's real? Oh, it's real, Victor said. But you won't find it in an auction room now. Whoever bought it, they didn't buy it for money. They bought it to keep it hidden. Why? Victor leaned in, his voice a whisper. Because sometimes the truth can burn brighter than the legend, and some people would rather protect the legend. The collector. The rain had just started when Daniel stepped out of the Camden Cafe. Victor's words still rang in his ears. They bought it to keep it hidden. That meant one thing. Whoever had the letter wasn't just a collector. They were a gatekeeper. It didn't take long for Daniel to get a name. One phone call to an old contact at Sotheby's, a promise of complete anonymity, and he had it. Julian Hargrove, art dealer, philanthropist, known for throwing extravagant charity galas, and for his obsession with music memorabilia. And, most importantly, known for never selling what he bought. By nightfall, Daniel was outside Hargrove's Belgravia townhouse, a towering Georgian building with wrought iron balconies and warm lights spilling from the tall windows. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted into the damp London air. Tonight, it seemed, Julian was hosting one of his famous gatherings. Daniel straightened his coat and walked toward the door. No invitation, no plan, just a name, a purpose, and the knowledge that the last letter of Freddie Mercury might be somewhere inside. The doorman eyed him suspiciously. Invitation, sir? Daniel flashed a smile he didn't feel. Press, Evening Standard, covering the gala. A pause. Then the doorman stepped aside, and Daniel slipped inside. The room was a blur of designer gowns, tailored suits, and champagne flutes. Crystal chandeliers reflected in polished marble floors, and a jazz trio played softly in the corner. But Daniel wasn't here for the music. He scanned the crowd until he spotted him. Julian Hargrove, tall, silver-haired, with a charisma that seemed to pull people in like a tide. He was holding court near the fireplace, speaking animatedly to a group of guests. Daniel waited for his moment, then approached. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, extending a hand. "Daniel Ashford, I believe you recently acquired something extraordinary." Julian's smile was charming, but his eyes were sharp. "I acquire many extraordinary things, Mr. Ashford. You'll have to be more specific." "The letter," Daniel said quietly, "Freddie Mercury's last." For a fraction of a second, Julian's smile faltered. Then it was back, smooth as glass. "I'm afraid I don't discuss my private collection. This isn't just a piece of memorabilia," Daniel pressed. "It's a message he wrote to the world. Don't you think the world deserves to hear it?" Julian's voice softened, but there was steel underneath. The world heard enough. Sometimes, Mr. Ashford, the dead deserve their silence. Flashback, Garden Lodge, November 1991. Freddie sat in his study, a silk robe draped over his thin frame. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light over the desk where an envelope lay, half-sealed. He held a pen in his hand, paused over the page as if the words themselves were too heavy to lift. Mary Austin entered quietly, setting down a cup of tea. "You should rest," she said. "I will," Freddie replied, his voice tired but still melodic. "Just not yet. There's something I need to finish before the curtain falls." He looked down at the paper again, and for a moment, the bravado was gone. No stage lights, no cheering crowds. Just a man trying to leave the right words behind. Back in the present, Julian sipped his champagne. "Good evening, Mr. Ashford. Enjoy the party. But you won't find what you're looking for here." Daniel watched him walk away, the weight of the chase settling heavier on his shoulders. If Julian wouldn't talk, he'd have to find another way in. breaking the silence. The rain had stopped by the time Daniel reached the narrow alley behind Hargrove's Belgravia townhouse. The gala inside was still in full swing, muted jazz and muffled laughter spilling faintly into the night. He checked his watch. If his plan worked, he had maybe 30 minutes before anyone noticed he was gone. It wasn't exactly breaking and entering, not yet, but the tradesman's entrance was unlocked, and Daniel had learned long ago that half the world's secrets could be reached simply by walking like you belonged there. He slipped inside, moving quickly past a darkened kitchen and down a short hallway until he found himself in a quieter part of the house. The party noise faded. Here, the air was different, still heavy with the faint scent of leather and old paper. And then he saw it, a door with a digital keypad. He'd expected as much. Julian wasn't the kind of man to leave his treasures lying around. But fate or luck was on Daniel's side. As he stood there, debating his next move, two waitstaff came down the hall, chatting in low voices. One of them entered the code without even glancing at him. 2-7-1-1, the date of Freddie's death. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, walls lined with glass cases and mahogany shelves, guitars signed by legends, first press vinyl, stage costumes displayed on mannequins, and there, on a central pedestal under a pane of spotless glass, was the envelope, cream-colored, red wax seal, those same 3 words, to the world. Daniel's breath caught. He stepped closer, careful not to trigger any alarms. The envelope looked even more fragile up close, as if the paper itself carried the weight of everything Freddie had left unsaid. He leaned down, tried to read through the faint shadow of the paper inside. Most of it was illegible, but one line, just one, was visible when the light hit it at the right angle. If you are reading this, I am already... The rest was obscured. Flashback, Garden Lodge, November 23rd, 1991, early morning. Freddie sat at the same desk, the envelope now fully sealed. His hands trembled slightly as he pressed the wax shut. Mary Austin stood nearby, watching silently. "You're sure?" she asked. Freddie nodded. "If the world ever sees it, it will be when it's ready. And if it's never ready, then perhaps it was only meant for me." He placed the letter in the drawer, his eyes lingering on it for a moment longer. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. "Now, darling, let's have some music." Back in the present, Daniel's heart was pounding. He pulled out his phone, snapping a quick photo of the visible words. That's when he heard it, the soft click of the keypad behind him. The door opened. Julian Hargrove stood there, framed in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Ashford," he said, his voice calm but cold, "I warned you. Some things are not yours to uncover." The price of truth. The door shut behind Julian with a quiet, decisive click. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. He had been caught, standing inches from the most sought-after piece of paper in rock history. But Julian didn't shout, didn't call for security. Instead, he walked past Daniel, his polished shoes silent on the carpet, and stopped beside the glass case. He looked down at the envelope for a long moment. "Do you know what happens," Julian began softly, "when you open something that was never meant for you?" Daniel held his ground. "I know what happens when you hide something the world deserves to see." Julian chuckled, a sound without humor. "You think this is about hiding? No, Mr. Ashford. This is about protecting." He glanced at Daniel. "Sit." Reluctantly, Daniel lowered himself into one of the leather chairs by the wall. Julian poured 2 glasses of scotch from a crystal decanter and handed one to him. "I didn't buy this letter to own it," Julian said. "I bought it to keep it out of the hands of people who would destroy the man it belonged to." Daniel frowned. "Destroy him? Freddie Mercury is a legend. No one can take that away." Julian took a slow sip. Legends are fragile things. All it takes is one truth, one sentence, to change the story the world tells itself. His gaze returned to the envelope. That letter is not a farewell. It is a confession. Flashback, Garden Lodge, November 1991. The curtains were drawn against the cold London light. Freddie sat on the couch, a blanket around his shoulders. Mary Austin beside him. Jim Hutton was in the kitchen, making tea. On the coffee table lay the envelope. "Unseal for now." Mary's voice was gentle. "You don't have to say everything." Freddie's reply was almost a whisper. "That's exactly why I have to say it now. Because once I'm gone, they'll say what they want. They'll build their own Freddie. But this will be the truth. All of it." Mary's eyes shimmered. The world might not be ready. "Then keep it safe," Freddie said, a tired smile on his lips. "And if they're never ready, let it burn." Back in the private room, Daniel leaned forward. "What's in it, Julian?" Julian studied him for a long, silent moment. "I'm not going to tell you everything, but I'll tell you this. If that letter is ever made public, the last chapter of Freddie Mercury's life will be rewritten, and not everyone will survive what it says." Daniel's mind raced. Then why not destroy it? Julian's eyes darkened. Because one day, someone might be strong enough to read it. Someone who understands what it means. But that day is not today. And you, Mr. Ashford, are not that someone. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Daniel knew he was being dismissed. But as Julian escorted him to the door, Daniel glanced over his shoulder one last time at the glass case. A confession, a truth that could shatter a legend, and he was more certain than ever he had to read it. The break-in. It had been 3 days since Daniel last saw the envelope. 3 days of replaying Julian's words in his mind. It is a confession. Confession to what? A hidden relationship? A secret regret? Something darker? The more he thought about it, the more he knew. He wasn't going to get answers by waiting. That night, London lay under a thin veil of fog. Belgravia was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every footstep. Daniel wore dark clothes, a cap pulled low, gloves to mask his prints. He wasn't proud of what he was about to do, but pride had long since given way to obsession. Julian's townhouse loomed ahead, the windows dark. The keypad on the side entrance was the same one he'd seen before, 2-7-1-1. The code worked again, a quiet click breaking the night air. Inside, the corridor smelled faintly of polish and aged paper. Daniel moved quickly, knowing there were cameras, even if he hadn't spotted them before. The private collection room was just as he remembered, dimly lit, lined with glass cases. And there it was, the envelope. The lock on the glass wasn't sophisticated, a slim piece of wire and a steady hand. And Daniel heard the soft pop of the latch. The case lifted. His gloves brushed against the paper. It was lighter than he expected, almost fragile. He pulled it out, holding it under the lamp in the corner. His breath caught as he broke the wax seal. The paper inside was thick, smooth. Freddie's handwriting looped elegantly across the page, strong even in its final days. The first line was exactly as he had glimpsed before. "If you are reading this, I'm already..." But now he saw the rest. Gone from the stage, but not from the truth I have carried all my life. Flashback, Garden Lodge, November 1991, late night. Freddie sat alone in the study, the fire burning low. He dipped his pen again, writing slowly, deliberately. The words were not rehearsed lyrics or poetic flourishes. They were raw, almost trembling on the page. The world has adored a man I created, but there's another man, quieter, lonelier, who lived behind the curtain. This is for those who wish to know him, and perhaps forgive him. He paused, the pen hovering over the paper, then continued. Back in the present, Daniel's eyes scanned the next lines, but footsteps in the hall froze him in place. The door handle turned. Panic surged through him. He slid the letter inside his jacket, returned the empty envelope to the glass case, and stepped into the shadows just as the door opened. A beam of flashlight swept the room. A security guard. Daniel held his breath as the light passed inches from his face. After what felt like an eternity, the guard moved on, the door closing behind him. Daniel exhaled slowly. He was still inside enemy territory, holding the one thing that could change Freddie Mercury's story forever. And now, there was no going back. The last curtain. The night wrapped around Daniel like a cold, heavy cloak as he slipped out of Belgravia and into the labyrinth of London side streets. In his jacket, pressed against his chest, was a letter. The paper felt alive somehow, warm and fragile, like a living pulse between his hands. By the time he reached his small flat in Islington, the city was silent. He locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat at his desk. For a moment, he simply stared at it. This was the moment he had chased for weeks, maybe years. A truth sealed for 3 decades. A voice from beyond the grave. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the pages. The letter, November 22nd, 1991. If you are reading this, I am already gone from the stage, but not from the truth I have carried all my life. Daniel's eyes moved slowly over each line, his breath shallow. The world has adored a man I created, a man with teeth bared in laughter, with costumes that turned bodies into fireworks, with a voice that could drown out the darkness. But there was another man, one who lived behind the curtain. He was not always brave. He was not always kind. He was often alone. A silence filled the room, heavy as lead. I have been loved, yes, but I have also hurt people who loved me. I have chased the thrill of a crowd while neglecting the whisper of a friend. I have sung about truth while hiding my own. And in hiding, I let fear make a home in my bones. Daniel could almost hear Freddie's voice now. Not the booming stage presence, but the soft, reflective tone of a man speaking only to himself. Flashback, Garden Lodge, November 1991. Freddie sits at his desk. The fire's glow painting his face in amber light. Mary Austin watches him from the doorway. He doesn't see her. He is lost in the rhythm of the pen, as if the ink itself carries a soul. This is not an apology for who I was. I was born to be outrageous, to challenge, to unsettle. But it is an apology for the moments when fear kept me from loving fully. I kept parts of myself hidden, not because I was ashamed of them, but because I was afraid they would be taken from me if I showed them. Daniel swallowed hard. This wasn't scandal. This wasn't salacious. This was something far more dangerous. It was intimate to the world. Remember me for the music, if you must. But if you truly wish to know me, remember the man who sometimes could not face the mirror. Remember the friend who could be cruel when he was afraid. Remember the lover who built walls because he feared the day they would crumble. Flashback, Mountain Studios, summer 1991. Victor stands in the sound booth, watching Freddie through the glass. Freddie sings softly, no microphone, no band, just a melody to himself. Between verses, he closes his eyes and whispers, "I'm still here for now." Daniel kept reading, his throat tightening. I am not asking for sainthood, nor sympathy. I am asking for understanding. That a man can be both the brightest light in the room and the darkest shadow in his own heart. I am asking you to forgive the silences as much as the songs. The last paragraph was shorter, almost hurried. When the curtain falls, don't mourn the character. Don't mourn the costumes or the spotlights. Mourn the man if you must, but then let him go and live loudly enough that your own truth never needs to be written in secret. Freddie Mercury. Daniel lowered the pages, his eyes fixed on nothing. The room seemed smaller now, as if the words themselves had taken up all the air. He imagined the world reading this. The headlines, the documentaries, the endless debates over what it meant. And he realized with a sharp pang that Julian had been right. This letter could change the way people saw Freddie Mercury forever. He reached for his phone. His editor's number was already on the screen. One call, and this would be out in the world by morning. His thumb hovered over the call button. But in his mind, he heard another voice. Not his editor's, not Julian's. Freddie's. Let him go. Daniel closed his eyes. The weight of the paper in his hands felt different now. Not like a treasure, like a trust. Slowly, he folded the letter, slid it back into its envelope, and sealed it with tape. Then he took a box from the closet, placed the letter inside, and locked it. Not to hide, not to bury, but to keep safe until the world was ready. Epilogue, 1 year later. Daniel walks through Garden Lodge with Mary Austin. The air smells faintly of roses. In the study, the grand piano still gleams under the afternoon light. Mary plays a single note, lets it hang in the air. He wouldn't have minded you reading it, she says quietly. I know, Daniel replies, but I think he would have minded me sharing it. Mary smiles faintly. Then you understand him better than most. They stand there for a moment, in the house that still breathes with the ghost of a voice the world will never forget. Musical note fade out with "The Show Must Go On" softly playing, strings swelling under the final words. Live loudly enough that your truth never needs to be written in secret.